Okay. So we're learning chapter 6. In chapter 6, we're going to learn about the animal soul. And we are learning as the animal soul as a contrast to the godly soul, right? The godly soul has how many? The godly soul has how many, what is the English they have here? Spheres? How many spheres are in the godly soul? 10. So how many crowns of impurity does the animal soul have? 10. Okay. And the last thing we're discussing is why they're called spheres by the godly soul and crowns of impurity by the animal soul. Okay. I gave last class 2 meanings of the word sphera. There are more, but I gave you 2. What were they?
We're discussing the
Why are the whatever you want to call them, the aspects, powers, abilities, spheres when we talk about the godly soul, and called crowns of impurity when we refer to the animal soul. So what is a sphera? What is the meaning of the word sphera?
Tell.
Right? It comes from the word sipur, tell a story. Another meaning? What? Count. It does relate to the word count, but we're not, that one was not related to the topic. Light. Yeah, it means bright or radiant, right? So the idea is that these things, right, the Sechel, the Middot, the intellect and emotions in the godly soul, they shine and they tell about godliness. Right? On the other hand, those same things, when they're part of the godly soul, what do? They're an impurity. What does an impurity do to something?
It blocks.
It blocks, right? It muddies it, right? So if you have water and you mixed sand into it, right? You wouldn't want to drink that. Okay. So if you have some, let's just pick something random, some chesed. I don't know what chesed is, but it's the chesed of the godly soul. So what do we know that the chesed of the godly soul does? What does the chesed of the godly soul do? Keep it. We're going to ignore the word chesed right now. If it's chesed of the godly soul, what does it do?
Doing something for Hashem.
What?
It's like kindness and holiness.
It brings in, instead of blocking, it lets in.
Right. It's a sphere, so it shines godliness and says something about godliness, right? So chesed of the godly soul is a way of expressing godliness. Notice I keep avoiding the word kindness. You keep throwing it in there, and I keep avoiding it. Okay. Now, what is the what?
You just said expresses kindness.
No, expresses godliness. What does chesed of the animal soul do? So what happens if you have some chesed of the animal soul mixed with your chesed of the godly soul? Would you really want to drink that?
No. But it doesn't make, no, forget drinking. That doesn't make sense.
Why not?
Because you can't be shining and blocking.
Can you have water?
Sorry, can you say this again?
If you have...
I don't think it works.
Expresses godliness and the animal soul blocks it.
Right, but it's not just that it blocks it. It acts like an impurity. What does an impurity do? It takes something else and makes it...
Impure too. Yeah.
Makes it... Right. So if you have water and you put sand in the water and you stir it around, would you want to drink that? No. So if you have the chesed of the godly soul and you add a little bit of the chesed of the animal soul and you mix it around, what happens? You wouldn't want to drink that either, metaphorically speaking, right? It's not an actual liquid. Yes?
I just don't get how you could have both at the same time.
Which...
Taking out the water. I'm saying you can be... I know we do it. I'm saying from the way we explained it, you can be shining God and blocking God at the same time. You could do it 1 minute, like you could do it separately.
Well, okay. We'll get to that later. Okay? What I want you to think about, though, is we're talking about the chesed of the godly soul and the chesed of the animal soul as if they're 2 different substances, right? That's the whole analogy, right? If it's acting as an impurity, right? Same thing, you have the... And this is why I'm not getting into what chesed means and gevura means. If you have the chachma of the godly soul, that shines and reveals and says something about godliness. If you have chachma of the animal soul, it does the opposite, right? What happens if you mix the chachma of the animal soul and the chachma of the godly soul? It would be like having water mixed with something that, some impurities, right? Okay. This is different than the intuitive way that many of us think about this, where we think of the different parts of our psyche as knives. Now, I don't even think of it as a knife. Is a knife a bad thing? Is a knife a good thing?
Yeah. Can be both.
Depends how you use it.
So is the knife a good thing or is the knife a bad thing?
It's not.
It's neither. Right? There's a fancy word for this in English.
Neutral.
Okay? Neutral. Neutral. Okay? Neutral. Right? Okay? There's a word. Amoral. What does amoral mean? It's not moral, nor is it immoral. A knife is not a good thing.
Amoral?
Yes, amoral.
Never heard of that.
It's a fancy word. Okay?
So,
Immoral means no morals. Just moralities, like is black. Is black a moral color or an immoral color? The answer is colors don't have morality, right? That's not one of the things it's not one of its features.
why? It doesn't have a white moral.
What?
Okay.
It depends on where
No,
you're
like
at.
shiny blue is.
It depends where you are.
Shiny blue is
I'm reminded of the kindergarten class where the teacher gets up and says, "Children, if I have 2 lollipops and then I eat one, how many lollipops do I have?" And the children say, "What flavor are the lollipops?"
Look, red is always symbolizing anger.
Now,
Always.
I was trying to be subtle. I can be more explicit if I need to be. Okay. So, a knife, right? We don't think of a knife as good or bad. We just say, well, the knife doesn't really have a good or bad side to it at all, right? It depends on how you use it, right? Yeah. So we think of the knife as neutral, right?
It's an object.
That's because it's an object, right? So now, let's take something like intelligence. Is intelligence good or is intelligence bad? Most of us have the idea that, well,
No, it depends on how you use it.
it depends on how you use
Well,
it.
nuclear weapons
it's
would
like
be used
that.
without intelligence.
Genius.
Okay.
Okay.
1 second, right? I don't want.
Anything yes good and yes bad?
Oh no, that's exactly the point. Is that this is completely wrong. This way of thinking about it is totally wrong. That in fact,
What seeing things amoral is wrong?
yeah. The Alter Rebbe is saying is like this: there is a chesed which is there's a chesed which is godly, and there's a chesed which is not only is it not godly. What happens? It's an impurity on godliness, right? Okay. So how many kinds of chesed are there? 2. So it's to say, well, it depends how you use your chesed? No, they're 2 different things.
I mean, it's the same thing with a knife. It's just a knife is an object, not a.
But a knife is not like that. A knife,
But that's like a punch is an action. There's 2 different things. There's a punch that I hit you in the face, and sorry, Chas v'shalom, and you get hurt. And then there's like a punch, like I'm punching in the numbers. But I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm saying because it's like harder to understand because that's an object.
okay.
So the drink part.
Like speech, there's 2 different kinds of speeches. There's good speech and bad speech.
But this is actually, the Alter was going to say that also, is that there's actually, not the 2 kinds of speech, there's 2 different powers of speech.
Yeah.
There's your godly soul's power to speak, which is quite limited.
Why?
Well, if we go back to chapter 4, which we should all be experts in by now, right?
Yeah. Uh-oh.
What are the godly soul's power of speech? Its speech is in the 613 commandments of the Torah. That's it. So if your godly soul is using its power of speech, then what words are coming out of your mouth?
Godly.
Good one.
Godly words, right? Torah words.
Yeah.
If you're not saying Torah words, then is your godly soul?
Is right now what we're doing Torah words?
Hopefully.
No, I'm saying like.
Right now? Yes.
When I'm talking to Masi about let's cook dinner tonight, that's not godly.
And that's also not your godly soul talking.
That's my animal soul.
That's right.
Does not be bad.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
I'm not necessarily bad, but it's not.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Okay? To make this a little bit easier, we have to think of the godly soul and animal soul as like they're 2 different people. Okay? If I have an opinion and you have an opinion, right? We could have a problem. My opinion, your opinion contradict, right? And so, like, I say we should do X, and you're like, X is stupid, right? Now we have a problem, right? Because the fact that you voiced your opinion has now contaminated my absolute control over what happens. That's something that can happen between people, right? Which is why relationships are interesting, right?
Yeah.
Okay? We have to think of the godly soul and animal soul as two distinct beings, not how you use something. It's not like you have a knife in the kitchen. You can use it to make soup, or you can use it to kill your neighbor, right? Rather, you have to think of it as like you have two people.
Yeah.
One person has one set of ideas and feelings, and their mind works in a certain way, right? And the other person is entirely different. And what happens when they voice those differences? We're going to have conflicts, right? Okay? And how are we thinking of the animal soul? And its chesed, whatever chesed is, and its chachma, whatever chachma is, and its gevur, whatever gevur is. How do we think of those things? As simple impurities on the godly soul. Okay? So I'm going to use this as an analogy. I do not mean to carry it all the way through. But let us say you had a you have a adult, and the kind of adult that really doesn't think that children are people. You know what kinds of adults?
Yeah.
Okay. And the adult is talking, and then the adult is talking about what they think or whatever, right? And then the child makes known that the child also has an opinion about something, right? I want something. In the mind of the adult, what is the child?
Nothing.
No, not nothing.
Annoying.
An annoyance, right? Right? We were having this wonderful adult conversation. All of a sudden, this impurity has showed up and just messed everything up. You know, now there's from the godly soul's point of view, it has this thing called chachma and chesed, and we'll talk about what this means. And then there's this annoying thing called the animal soul, and it also has chachma and chesed. Whenever its chachma and chesed shows up, how does the godly soul relate to that? As just annoying, right? A bother, something that contaminates, corrupts, distorts. So is it the issue of you have one thing and now how should you use it, or is it actually that there's two different things? Yeah.
So I could be wrong, but why then is the animal soul more dominant? Because from your example, it sounds like the godly one is getting annoyed by the animal one.
Well, apparently you've never been a parent of small children.
Because your child is more dominant?
Well, children, generally how it works is that as long as the child is conscious, they do not keep themselves quiet for the benefit of the adults, and the adults do a lot of changes in how they live their lives to accommodate the fact they have to deal with a child, right?
Right.
When was the last time you saw a 5-year-old say, you know what, I've decided that my mother needs a break, so I'm going to go play quiet in my room to allow her to take a nap?
I know, but in our day-to-day life, when I am trying to dominate or trying to learn and I get distracted, for me that's an annoyance of I'm like, oh, why can't I just focus? When I'm doing something that I like in my animal soul, I'm not like, oh, I don't know. Do you get it?
Well, it depends where you're trying. If you're trying to be more of a vessel for your godly soul, your animal soul, which one's bothering you? But the point that I want us to understand is...
So the animal soul is not necessarily more dominant. They're equal.
Not necessarily, but that's not really the main topic. It's definitely more noticeable. Okay? What I want us to understand is that we don't actually have something called chesed. We have two cheseds. We don't have something called gvura. We have two gvuras. Okay? Now, are you ready for my Sfiras Omer spiel?
Yeah.
Because I have to do my Sfiras Omer spiel because it's really important to me. Partially because I think it's true, and partially it's just like me indulging my ego. Okay? Okay, so you know the whole idea of Sfiras Omer, you have to like fix your midos, right? Every day is different thing, chesed, and gvura, right? Okay, yeah. Okay. So people often have this thing like, I have to work on having more gevura or sheba chesed and more tefera sheba netzach, whatever that stuff means. You've heard this idea before?
Yeah.
Okay. That's wrong.
What?
It's wrong.
Why?
Well,
You're not supposed to work on yourself to have Sheba chesed or
no, not
I've
really.
seen people that are like
my husband's chesed Gvura because he does this and I do that, and it's really annoying. Actually.
It is really annoying. It's extremely annoying. Okay, it's extremely annoying. Okay, let me explain something to you. Okay,
I'm sorry.
have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz? Have you ever, okay, so The Wizard of Oz, they had this big thing about how, like, when they were in the real world, it was black and white, and they went into Oz, it was in color. Okay. But we all know that the real world is not black and white. The real world is actually color, right? Mm-hmm. So could you imagine somebody, like, not as an artistic trick for a movie to, like, give you a certain sense of something, but, like, in real life, a person saying, you know what? My house doesn't have enough color. You mean, like, there's not enough variety? No. It's just like the spectrum, like, ends right before, purple. So there's just like, if you put something purple in my house, it doesn't show up as purple because there's not enough purple. I mean, colors are colors, right? You could, if you take a purple object and bring it into your house, it's purple, right? Because that's the way the world is, right? The world has a full spectrum of color, right? Now, some people have different arrangements of color, right? Some houses are brighter, some houses have more flashier colors, right? Been to different people's houses, right? But even if there's a different ratio of colors and vibrancies and all these things, that's not because the actual way color works, optics and the palette are different, right? It's clear to everybody? Okay. Are you a person?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a person, by default, you have chachma, you have chesed shebechesed, and gvur shebe. You have all 49 of them because you're a person.
Right.
Do you have them in different ratios and in different ways than other people?
Of course.
Of course. And you know what? That's what reveals that you're an individual. What would happen if we all worked on having the right, perfect balance?
We're all the same.
We'd all be the same, right? Have you seen places where everybody's house is exactly the same?
Yeah.
Is that like a place you want to live?
No.
No, right? There's something very unsettling, right? There's something that humanity gets sucked at when everybody tries, like, everybody's house is, it's like, those are commercials for Suburbia from the 1970s, right? Everybody's house is the same. Everybody's life is the same, right? Yeah. Of course, the way your chachma and gvura and ches and all these things interact is going to be different for you than it is for me. And what's wrong with that? That's fine.
We need to work on it more, all our different...
No, you don't need to work on it. It's fine. Whatever it is, it's fine.
And what's my source during this time?
Well, the problem is that you have chesed shebegvura and netzach shebaha. You have all those things. The problems are not spheres.
They're what, personality traits?
Well, what did we start the class with? What are spheres? That's right. So the fact that you're a more chesed, and your chesed is really dominant, whereas the gvura is less dominant, fine. But here's the thing, is that chesed gvura blend that you have, is that your 10 crowns of impurity, or is that the 10 spheres of your godly soul? That's the question you have to ask.
That's what's happening during this time.
That's the sphere, right? So you take a sphere, right? You take to the day, and you're like, okay, fine. Whatever it is, okay, I'm gonna use just a simple one, not today's because it's simpler. Okay, let's take chesed shebechesed. Chesed means you love, right? And because you love, you love.
Wait, you can't do two different ones?
Do one a day. Okay, so yeah. Right, it's just this idea that you love, and you love the fact you love, and you're into loving, right? And so you're just all around loving. It's very simple, right? Okay. We're all loving, right? There's no person in the world who's reasonably mentally healthy who's not loving and into the fact that they love. Now here's the question. What do you love? What do you love? And and a kind of love that you love it. And you're like wholeheartedly loving it. And you feel uncomplicated about that love. And now ask yourself, is that a way of bringing godliness into the world, that kind of emotional experience? Or is that not? Is it a sphere or is it not a sphere?
If it's not a sphere, what is it?
It's a crown of impurity. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, like, we have a very multifaceted personality.
So we are doing it. You're just saying it in different words.
Because this is what's very important. The thing is not to say, okay, how do I work on having more chesed shebechesed, or more gvura shebechesed, or more netzach shebehoid, or whatever it is. Like, you don't have to work on having that more. The question is, which one do you have? Now, it gets more complicated. It's not a class on Sfir Somer. Okay, but the question is not do I have this mid, do I have this trait? The question is I have this trait. Is it a way of expressing God or is it not? Okay? To put this another way, when we left Egypt, we don't differentiate all the Jews that leave Egypt, right? Because Hashem takes us out, all we do is follow, right? But Sfiras Omer, every Jew is different. Why? Because my unique blend of my faculties is different than your blend. And so the question is not, how do I work on having more of this or more of that? It's not about personality sculpting. You're whatever you are. With whatever, traits you have. It doesn't matter. But the question is are these spheres or are these impurities? And the answer is, well, okay, there is some impurity there, so you've got to get rid of that impurity. Right? It would be like, using the example of water again, yeah? If you have a 10-gallon jug of water, and I have this little cup of water, we have different amounts of water, right?
Yeah. We both have water.
We're both right. But the Sfiras Omer question is not whether I don't have as much water as you have. The question is my water pure water, or does it have silt and stuff mixed into it, right? So I might have a cup of pure water, and you might have a 10-gallon jug, right, of contaminated water. And who's achieved more on the Sfiras Omer schedule? Right, the one that has the pure water. Now, if you go looking for water, though, which one are you going to find more of in the other one, right? So if you go looking for, say, chesed, right? Chesed, you love and you're really loving. You might find someone who's much more loving than another person. Does that mean they've succeeded in that day's work of Sphira? No. Because the question is that love revealing God, or is that love an impurity? And you could find somebody, the love is very minuscule because they're just not that much of a loving person. That's not how Hashem made them. Fine, okay. But the little bit of love that is manifest in their life is pure. It's a sipur. It tells a story of godliness. It reveals godliness. It shines godliness into the world. Now this only makes sense if you don't think of you having as one chesed or two, but rather you have two cheseds and two gevuras. And the question is, in each one of them, is to deal with the impurities of the animal soul.
But we are supposed to take every day and look at the sphera and see where in our lives can we bring that which we already have for holiness.
Right. Now, this is, by the way, why Sfiras Omer is connected to Pesach. Because the idea is to take that sense of Hashem that we got on Pesach, which we discussed before, remember, on Pesach? Yeah. And you have to figure out, okay, how is my chesed, how is my gevura going to be revealing that, shining that, telling that story, rather than just being an impurity that blocks it. But it's not about, if you're not as loving as a person as you would like, I mean, maybe you should work on that, maybe you shouldn't, but that's not Sfiras Omer. If you're not as disciplined a person as you would like, again, that maybe you should work on it, maybe you shouldn't, but that's not Sfiras Omer. The question is, where you really are disciplined, wherever that is that really infused with it out being about revealing Hashem in the world and in your life? Or is that not that? Okay? So the idea here is that you have two different cheseds, two different gevuras, two different everythings. Okay? And the way we're going to think of them is that the animal souls are considered impurities. And as a general rule, what is a person's attitude to an impurity?
Stay away.
We like to stay away from them, and if we have them, we like to get rid of them, or at least get them down to a tolerable level, right? Mm-hmm. Is this water pure water?
Yeah.
It's pure enough to drink.
Does it say anywhere about the spheres thing that you just shared?
Yeah. What, would you like Hebrew or would you like English? If you want Hebrew, the best place is in the Chassidus Muvaris. There's a mimer on Sfiras Omer, and then there's a mimer of the Rebbe from Tafshin Yud Aleph on Sfiras Omer.
What I just find in regular Kutei Sichos?
Yeah, Kutei Sichos speaks about it more generally. There, I think it's better.
But Tafshin Yud Aleph?
Tafshin Yud Aleph, yeah. Okay. Okay. In fact, let's just go one step further. Many people's desire to work on themselves in Sfiras Omer is motivated by what?
Their self.
Yes. Are we all unsatisfied with our self-image in some way?
Yeah.
Would we all like to look in the metaphoric mirror and say, wow, I'm really impressed with the character of that person I see in that mirror?
Yes.
And then do we corrupt Sfiras Omer into being about that?
Yes.
Okay, right? So it turns out that most people's Sfiras Omer is like the opposite of Sfiras Omer, which is not meant to dishearten you. It's hopefully meant to. What?
Meant to be about you?
No. It's meant, how do I...
It's these midas that are in you.
They are in you. It's in you, it's not about you. Is what's happening in me about me or not? Is my love all about me or is my love about Hashem? Is my discipline about me or is my discipline about Hashem? Right? It's me, but it's not about me.
We should be focusing on trying to express
Right.
godliness.
Right. How does the godliness of Pesach, how is that shown in my unique way, in my unique character? Each different aspect of me. Rather than how do I make myself into something else that, because I would like to be more impressed with myself in my own mind. Okay. End of Sfiras Omer discussion. If this wasn't a Sfiras Omer, if it wasn't in Sfiras Omer, I don't know if I would have said that. Okay. Now, these crowns of impurity they're clothed in the person's blood. That's what it says, right? Okay, now why is it significant to know that they're clothed in our blood? Well, what's the purpose of blood? What is the purpose of blood?
It's our life.
It's our life source. Okay, so that means, is our life source coming from holiness or is our life source coming from this impurity?
Our impurity?
This impurity. Yes.
That's interesting.
Yes. So it means, right, as a living person, what are you? As far as, godliness is concerned. That's not what it says. What does the text actually say? What does the text say? The soul which is derived from the Sitra Achad, the Klipas Nog, which is clothed in man's blood, consists of 10 crowns of impurity. So what's clothed in our blood is impurity. So what's enlivening us? What is enlivening us? So then, what are we? Just giant, walking, talking, self-sustaining impurity. We are a blight on the truth of godliness. That is what that means.
But we're part of Hashem.
Oh, no. You are not part of Hashem.
We're an extension of Hashem.
Please turn to chapter
We have a part
29. On mine, it's page 125, in the middle of the chapter. Okay. You should have a footnote 5. You see footnote 5? Yes, you see that in the text, footnote 5? You don't use the same thing then. You don't have footnote 5 because you're using a different book. I asked everyone to have Tanya's for this class. How come that didn't happen? Okay. Right. Well, if you don't have, we don't have any more Tanya's.
There's something,
Footnote 5
Yes.
on the next page where it says Tehillim.
Where it says, yes.
It
Yes.
says Comp Psalm.
Right. Okay. So now go up to where in the text after the 5. This is the Sitra Achad, which is the very man himself in intermediate people, in whose heart the vital soul which animates the body is in its native strength. Hence, it is the very man himself. So you are. What does it say here? We're talking about people, regular people. Who are you?
I'm a little lost.
After 5. You see the 5 in the text?
Where's this page?
Because that's where I want to read from. This is the Sitra Achad, which is the very man himself, an intermediate people, in whose heart the vital soul which animates the body is in its native strength. Hence, it is the very man himself. So, what does that mean in English? No. What is enlivening you?
Our
Which
vital
soul? Which is the Nefesh Bahamis. Whereas with regard to the divine soul within him, it is said, the soul which thou gavest within me is pure. Note that the words thou which gavest within me, implying that the man himself is not the pure soul. So are you your godly soul? No. What are you?
Your animal.
Very good. Because what is enlivening your body?
Your
Blood.
impurity.
The blood, which is enlivened by the impurities of the animal soul. Now, if you were a tzaddik, this would all be different, as that chapter goes on to say, but you're not a tzaddik, so we're not going to worry about that right now. Okay? In other words, have you ever heard this idea that Musar is very harsh and Chassidus is all about making people feel good? You heard that before?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's not true. Because now we're going to learn stuff that's harsh. If you start from the perspective of the godly soul, that whatever is making me be a person, is it good or is it bad? There's a godly soul, and then there's this thing that makes that enlivening me as a person called the animal soul. What is that?
The animal soul.
And what is it? Is it
Bad.
It's bad. It's an impurity, right? And that's in line that the totality of my existence as a human being is just an embodiment of impurity. And every time I try and do something, and every time I'm motivated by something, every time I want something, every time I'm after something, every time I take care of myself, it's all just furthering that impurity. So imagine like you're trying to like filter the sand out of the water, but the sand keeps sand doesn't do this, but it keeps. Let's use a different example. You're trying to rid your house of termites, but the termites keep multiplying. Yeah. You might get frustrated with the termites, right? The godly soul is trying to get rid of the impurities, and the human being is busy trying to do what? Keep them and maintain them and strengthen them, right? So we're not saying now, oh, you have some negative attributes. You have a little bit of a temper problem. You're a little bit indulgent. And you have some character things you should work on. We're saying, no, the totality of the human psyche, which enlivens the person's flesh and blood, is an impurity. Oh, that was optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What are these? Now we're going to analyze these impurities. We're not going to treat them in a general way. We're going to break it down.
Is our like the animal soul?
No. It's a godly soul.
Well, we just said
That the soul is within you. It's not you. You.
are made up of animal souls.
That's right.
So that's what I was saying, that our animal soul is the main.
You said, is it stronger? I didn't say it's stronger. And I correct you. I said it's more noticeable. Why is it more noticeable? Because what's the thing that's keeping you alive and clothed in your body?
The blood.
The animal soul in the blood. The godly soul can be strong. Well, that's a matter of free will. You could make, look, think about it. If you were in a relationship with somebody, right? Any kind of relationship, you can make it all about you, right? That's right. So you have a godly soul. You can make your life all about you, and the godly soul gets dragged along and suffers, or you can make it about the godly soul, right? Which is going to require you to radically change how you live your life. Okay.
But naturally, we would go to the animal soul if we didn't work on ourselves at all.
That's right.
That means it's the main. Does it?
That's like saying.
You're right.
That's like saying since if you don't work on a relationship, the relationship tends to dissolve. The natural thing in all marriages tend to divorce. But I don't think that I would go that far. I would say that people are generally motivated to work on relationships, and so most relationships don't dissolve because most people don't want to actually live their life in their relationship. So most marriages, that take place in a culture that values marriage do not end in divorce. Notice I had to add that caveat there.
Yeah.
Okay, it's important, right? Because we're social creatures. If you're doing something all on your own, it's very, very hard. Right. Okay. So now we're going to learn all about the psychology of human beings. We call it the psychology of the animal soul because we're talking about it from the perspective of the godly soul. But if we were to take this same subject and divorce it of the context of Tanya, we would just call this human psychology, okay? All right. But we're not going to call, if it was a course of human psychology, it would be using very neutral terms to describe everything, right? But we're talking about it from the perspective of the godly soul, where everything is an impurity, so are we going to be using neutral terms? No, everything is going to get what kind of an adjective attached to it?
Bad one.
What? A bad one. All right. These are the 7 evil midos. Well, there you go. Right?
Right off the
Right off that. Everything you feel as a human being is categorized as evil, which stem from the 4 evil elements mentioned above, and the intellect begetting them, which is subdivided into 3: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, chacham, and das, which are the source of the midas. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that it actually starts with the emotions here, whereas if you remember in chapter 3, it started with the intellect. And the reason is because in the animal soul, i.e. in people, the base, the ground, is the emotions, not the intellect. Whereas with the godly soul, the reverse is true. The base is the intellect. So we have to have a little discussion on the difference between the seichel, intellect, and emotions, which we had way back at the beginning of the year, but we're going to revisit it. Okay. Broadly speaking, what is the difference between seichel and midas, intellect, and emotions? I'm just using because we need some words in English, but what is the broadly speaking the difference? Anyone know?
Between intellect and emotion?
Yes, or more accurately, seichel and midas. I don't know if intellect is the best translation for seichel.
New brain was in the heart.
Nah,
Why?
that's like saying the main difference between a Sefer Torah and a toilet is that one is in the shul and one is in the bathroom. I would say that the fact that they're in those places stems from the main difference between them, not the other way around. It's not like if you took the Sefer Torah, put it in the bathroom, it's equivalent to a toilet.
One is
Why? Yeah, but there's a reason why one is a heart.
Because one is illogical.
No, one's more like
I don't know.
to the book, like your cycle, like
Seichel's not always to the book.
the rock.
By the way, I'm learning Tanya now with my 12-year-old because he's becoming bar mitzvah. So we're learning chapter 3, so we have to go through Sechel and Middot. It's quite fascinating doing this with a 12-year-old.
Why?
What?
Why?
Because there's a level of self-awareness and maturity that the 12-year-old doesn't have, and so you have to figure out how to explain things in a way that they can understand.
So, Brooklyn already getting it right now.
I know.
That's why he's not so
Okay. Okay. So a good what?
It's the obvious.
It's the
They're
obvious.
opposites.
They're opposites. Good, but why are they opposites? That's important. They are opposites. Why are they opposites?
Because the cycles like go to the like the obvious thing to do.
No. No.
Well, isn't one kind of innate and the other you need to work on?
No. So there's when you want to get it, when you have questions like this, where you kind of actually do know the answer, you're just having a hard time formulating it because it's all mushy in your mind, which is a Bina problem, by the way. It's good to have tools, okay? It's like if you're cooking, you have all the ingredients. The problem is that you don't necessarily have the tools, right? For instance, do you have a brush to brush things on, right? If you want to like baste things, do you have a baster? Do you have a mixer, right? So a lot of times the people have all the ingredients. They have the actual stuff that they know, but they're not applying the right tools. Okay, so here are some tools you can use when you want to like get at what is really the difference. One thing you can do is you can ask, what makes each one superior to the other, or inversely, what is each one's deficiency? What is each one lacking that the other one doesn't have? Another thing you could do is you could ask yourself, why do I need both? Right? Those are different ways of getting at the same kind of thing. So what would happen, let's do that. What would happen if you had no seichel? Took it away. You didn't touch your emotions. What? But no, flesh it out. Don't just use a word. Don't just use a word to go. Like flesh out. What would life be like if we got rid of your seichel? And this is, by the way, easy to do because we have people who have no seichel.
You wouldn't think on how you feel.
What?
You'd be making like decisions on how you feel.
You would be making entire decisions on how
You
you.
wouldn't think about what you're doing. Like you wouldn't do things. Like you wouldn't write in your book. Like,
That's true. What else? I mean, can we give an example of someone who has emotion but not really any seichel? Or minimal level of
like you
seichel?
would say what I want.
Like a child. Very good. Now, what is a major difference between children and adults?
Adults can regulate.
Adults can regulate. Adults can plan, right? Okay. And another important difference is that who is the only person who's genuinely important in the life of a small child?
Themselves.
And when we encounter an adult like that, what is our reaction to them?
Well, they're acting like a child.
Right, we're quite repulsed by that, right? So, Seichel gives you a real awareness, a real grasp, a real appreciation of things that are beyond yourself, beyond what you feel in the moment, right? Beyond what you're experiencing in the moment, beyond now, gives you an awareness that there's later, right? And it even gives you an awareness that, like, other people matter, other things matter, right?
That's Seichel.
That's Seichel.
Specifically Seichel.
That's all Seichel.
She has no Seichel.
So someone who doesn't appreciate that there's a tomorrow is lacking in Seichel. Someone who doesn't appreciate that just because I feel certain way doesn't make it true is lacking Seichel. Someone who appreciates that the world doesn't revolve around them is lacking in Seichel. Now Seichel has different parts to it, but Seichel is an awareness of reality beyond ourselves. Okay. Now, have you ever met people that seem to not have emotion?
Yeah.
What's problematic? What?
Thankfully now.
What's problematic if you meet someone without very much emotion?
They can't relate to
You can't relate to them, right?
No.
Because
Like a wall.
it doesn't really sense like there's a person there, right? Because what is emotion? Emotion is how you connect to something. So midas are how you connect to something, and seichel is your awareness of things other than yourself. So the main thing in your seichel is what's beyond you. The main thing in your midas is what's the main thing in emotions is yourself. Okay. So this is why we have this interesting tension, right? Because if we have seichel and no emotion, seichel and no midas, right? That's very good if you're talking about something where all we need you is to accomplish a task, right? Like say a surgeon, right? It's not so great if you want to have a relationship with the person, right? Because there's not much of a person there. On the other hand, if you have midas and no seichel, it's very hard to have a connection with that person because that person, the only thing that's real to them is themselves and their experiences, right? Why can't you have a real relationship with a small child? And why can't you have a relationship with someone who's just, their head is in ideas all the time and they never feel? Because there's no them. So the child is too much them.
And they're too little.
And right? And so you need both, right? That make sense? Yeah. Okay. So now, what does it say about the godly soul that everything is grounded in seichel and that creates the emotions? What does that say about it? The godly soul, there's seichel, and then there's emotions. What does it say about a being if its emotions come after and are built on the seichel? So what's seichel? Just do a little substitution, right? What's seichel? My awareness of things beyond myself.
Right.
And my emotions are how I feel about things.
Yeah.
So how I feel about something is based on my
awareness. Selfish, no?
Then
Did we discuss that?
No. How I feel about something is based on my awareness of it. Then at the core of my emotions is me, or at the core of my emotions?
It would be about the things outside of yourself.
Right. On the other hand, what if we reversed it? What if we start as the core as being emotions, and then we add seichel?
Then it would be the seichel would be about what's.
That's right. Now think about it. What is the most powerful motivator in human reasoning? Truth? Honesty? What actually motivates human reasoning to work? Like, what makes people be smarter?
Interest.
Interest. Okay. Interest in what?
Something that they want to learn.
Well, it's different.
Why does it make them smaller?
Because reason doesn't operate on its own. Reason is in service of our emotions. So for instance, if somebody insults you, your brain works really hard to find a clever retort.
Really?
And the more vengeful and spiteful you feel towards them, right? If a lot of money is at stake, you get very more creative. Okay. If we feel like we could gain a lot or avert a big loss, right? And you know what's interesting? I've told you this before, that I only mention research if it confirms my biases. Okay. So here's the thing. If you give someone a research paper with some data and ask them to analyze it, figure out what the conclusions are. Okay? So what's interesting is that let's say they're they're very right wing, and this paper brings data to support a left wing position. If they're very right wing, they'll try and figure out what's wrong with the information. They'll make mistakes in analyzing it. Right? Or they'll come with creative ways of reinterpreting it. But if they're left wing, they won't, and then vice versa, left wing to right wing. Okay. So this idea that right when your emotions are for something, you become very good at explaining how it's true and good and works. And if you're against something, your intellect becomes very good at figuring out what's wrong with it. Right? Okay. Now, you would think that the more intelligent and knowledgeable a person is, the more honest they would be. Right? But in fact, that's not the case. So if you take someone that is like not so smart and not so politically engaged, their read of the data will probably be more accurate than someone who's highly knowledgeable and highly intelligent, because it turns out that human reasoning is subservient to and motivated by emotional drives.
So kids are.
And this is why every teacher knows that if people are not emotionally engaged in what you're doing, then you're not going to learn anything. In other words, at the end of the day, no matter how rational and broad-minded we are purporting to be, if you keep digging deep enough, what you will find is that what's happening is that we're not motivated by some awareness and appreciation of the truth or what's right. What we're motivated by is our emotions. And our intellect is in service of that. And basically, our entire intellect as human beings only deals with two questions. Human intellect, the intellect of the animal soul, has two questions and only two questions that it's constantly trying to answer. And they are, does it taste good? And how do I get it? Which basically means, is this good for me or bad for me? And if it is good for me, how do I get it? And if it's bad for me, how do I avoid it? And everything that our human minds are doing, our human reasoning is doing, is being undergirded by those drives. And so, when we're in a certain emotional state, right, we're drawn to think certain things are good for us, and other emotions, other things are good for us, bad for us. For instance, can you explain why a person would come up with creative ways to annoy their teacher? People do that, right? Why would you come up with a creative way to annoy your teacher? Right? So there's this idea. So first your intellect has convinced you, not necessarily full conscious thought, right? A lot of times the intellect is working subconsciously. So first you have you feel this desire for attention, and then your intellect's convincing that getting attention by annoying your teacher would meet the need of getting attention. And then the question is, well, how do I annoy the teacher, right? And then the question is, well, what are the costs of annoying the teacher? And are they worth the attention that I'm getting, right? Now, that's how everything works. Right? Sometimes there's a lot of layers, so it's harder to see. For instance, being a surgeon. You're saving lives, right? But what emotions are underlying someone being a surgeon?
Hope I don't die.
What? Well, you're a surgeon for someone else.
Wanting to save lives.
What? Why would you want to save lives?
Feels good.
Feels good.
Okay, I don't mind that.
Okay. Right? We have a desire to feel good, right? But here's the thing. Feeling good is too generic, okay? I want to be more specific.
Makes you feel accomplished at the end.
Okay, right. This is the thing. Feeling good is way too generic, and it misleads the point. We have some emotions. We have an emotional drive to feeling accomplished, to having social position, right? To having power. These are, by the way, three different things. Accomplished means, right, there's some actual task and you've achieved it. Now you feel proud of yourself because you achieved something, right? Then there's social position, right? People, right? There's a hierarchy and you have some. Right? Then there's just power, like just the fact that you can make things happen, and control of the thing, right? Okay. Then there's also one of the things is that we really despise being bored, right? We like things that are, right? We want to feel stimulated, right? So you take the emotional attraction to those things, and can those all be met by being a successful surgeon?
You think they are, you convince yourself.
Yeah. And why do you think people put up with the hell that medical school is and residency?
For that feeling.
Yeah. Now, by the way, we could add a little bit more.
Why? They're helping.
They are helping people. How does it feel to feel? How does it feel to know that your life is utterly wasted? That doesn't feel good either, right? So we also have a need to feel like we're doing something worthwhile. Add that to the mix, right?
Yeah.
Right? So you have a bunch of these needs, and we figure out clever ways of figuring out what those needs are and meeting them. And sometimes we do really good things because of that, right? And sometimes we do really horrible things because of that, right? But setting aside all of the reasoning and all of that is underlying is that we just have these emotional drives we're trying to fulfill. It doesn't start with there is an actual truth of the matter. What's the starting point is I care about me, and I have certain things that I feel drawn to, certain things that I feel repulsed by, right? And then my intellect tries to figure out what they are and how to meet them, right? And over time that develops, right? So when you're a child, that's all there. It's very simple. And then when you're an adult, it's much more complicated, right? Because it keeps iterating over itself. But that's all that's happening, right? So in a certain sense, the intellect is a slave to the emotions. So if you tell a person, you should really calm down, you're being too emotional, why should they calm down?
For you.
What?
For you.
Well, let's make the argument for them. Convince them. Why should they calm down?
Because your brain's going to do things that you don't really want to be doing.
Right. In other words, that you're not going to get your deeper emotional needs met if you allow your emotion, right, to control your intellect that way. So what you're saying is, in order for the intellect to be of good service to the emotions, right, the intellect needs some space to work. But it's still all about the emotions, right? Anyone here take a class in psychology?
Yeah.
What? Anybody?
Yeah.
And do they teach you how human beings are rational actors at our core, that we are all truth seekers? Or do they teach you how that we have different drives and needs that try to meet?
Different drives.
And in the language of the Tanya, we have the evil emotions, right, which stem from the evil elements, and the intellect. Okay. Now, the rule is that there's a process of iteration. So you first have fundamental drives, and then you have intellect, and that intellect then comes back and reshapes. Okay. So, for instance, you have this desire to feel safe, right? That's pretty fundamental. And then your intellect tries to figure out what makes you feel safe, and that gives you new things, like, say, for instance, desire to hold on to your blanket, right? Right? You see how that works?
Yeah.
And now that process iterates over and over and over again, and by the time you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, your internal life is a giant mess, right? Because you've done that over and over on itself a few times. Okay. Is that what's happening with the godly soul? No, not at all. The godly soul is like, oh, well, that's God. Well, if that's what's God, then of course I now love him, and of course I now fear him. Why? Well, because God is the kind of thing that one should love, and God is the kind of thing one should fear.
So basically, by the animal soul, the emotions have control over the intellect, and in the godly soul, the intellect has control over the emotions.
That's right. And if you examine the wording here between chapter 6, what?
It does.
It does. No, that's the way it is.
Oh.
If you examine the wording in chapter 6 and you contrast it to chapter 3, you'll see the wording is very different. Okay? It says here, the intellect begetting them, which is divided in three: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, the source of the midos. And then he continues, for the midos are according to the quality of the intellect. Hence, a child desires and loves petty things of inferior worth, for his intellect is too immature and deficient to appreciate things that are more precious. Likewise, he is provoked to anger and vexation over trivial things, and so too with boasting and other midos. But now, the only difference between the child and the adult, right, is the level they're operating on. So, for instance, little kids want little toys, and big kids want big toys, right? And little children are provoked over trivial things, and adults are only provoked over, right? So you see this, right? The child is losing their temper over they lost at Monopoly or whatever, right? Like, it's just a game, right? And the person comes home and they're really upset because their coworker said something like, this my dignity. But like, it's the same dynamic. It's just now you're operating on a different level, right?
Yeah.
But something's more big of a deal.
Okay, it's more big of a deal because as the intellect matures, right, the ability to be aware of more of reality, right? Little children plan for tomorrow.
Right.
What we're going to do tomorrow, right? Some people plan for like their whole life, right? Like they save and they invest, right? But the point is, no matter how broad your intellect goes, right? At the end of the day, it's on a leash, and the leash is the emotions. And so, yeah, the emotions come back and are reshaped by what the intellect knows, right? It's like the intellect is going out and finding out about the world in service of the emotions. And when it finds out information, that thing is the degree of a person's maturity. The emotions modify in accordance with what the intellect finds out about reality, but that modification doesn't change their underlying mode of being, which is that I have these drives and I have these needs and I'm going to meet them. That's not what's happening with the godly soul. Right? What is the loftiest need that the animal soul has? If we had to make the hierarchy, what's the loftiest need? What's the lowest need? If we had to rank them. We have needs for food, we have needs for what?
Using the bathroom.
Using the bathroom. Okay, that's a pretty lowly need, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the loftiest need you can think of?
Procreation.
Okay, procreation.
Having children.
That's the same thing. Anything else?
Wanting Hashem.
Leave Hashem out of it right now.
Okay.
Feel like
Wanting to change it. Wanting to be
sense of connection with humans.
Sense of connection, right? Well, that's pretty lofty. A little bit loftier.
Wanting to make the world better.
Okay, that's a form of it. Doesn't have to take that form.
Feeling stimulated.
Helping people.
Accomplishment.
Wanting spirituality.
Purpose or meaning, which a lot of those things are examples of. What happens if, and in fact, that's a very powerful need we have. Now, it's not the only need we have, right? It's the only drive we have, right? We have all sorts of emotions, right? But the need for companionship, the need for pleasure, the need for stimulation, the need for safety, right? The need to keep your body working, we have all sorts of needs, right? Okay. Now, maybe you can even develop your intellect to the point where you recognize that God could meet those needs, right? And that a relationship with God is the best way of meeting those needs, right? But is that the same thing as the godly soul? No. The animal soul, or i.e. a human being, operates in the following, right? I have needs. I have things that I must have, things that I desire, things that I'm drawn to, things that I cannot deal with. And then I have an intellect which tries to get to know the world and get to know myself and figure out how to manage that. And as that intellect matures, those emotions mature. But that means my entire life is being grounded on my own self-interest. Even purpose and meaning, which might cause me to be very selfless, is really grounded in self-interest. In contrast, the godly soul, or the godly soul's starting point is its intellect, its awareness. Hashem is real, Hashem is true. Hashem is the kind of being that should evoke love, should evoke fear, should evoke loyalty. And so, the godly soul manifests those emotions that are the proper way to relate to God. It's very different. It's very unhuman, the godly soul. If you dig deep enough under any human thing, what will you end up finding? That they're motivated by emotional self-interest, right? That's what the Alter is saying. And what the intellect is going to do is going to give that maturity, temper that, but it's working on that premise, it's working on that basis. That's what it means to be a human being. In fact, what's different about a human being than an animal is that whereas an animal doesn't have intellect really at all. So, the animal just develops however it does and that's it. Whereas a human being they have intellect, so they can change their emotions to the point that the needs that they're trying to fill are, say, maybe a lower, loftier needs, such as a need for purpose and connection rather than a need for power and control and safety. But at the end of the day, the emotions are what's driving the intellect of the animal soul. And what is it enlivens our body? Which means what is the thing driving our lives in as much as we're people? Our emotions. And if we pretend that it's not that, then we're deluding ourselves. Yes?
Is there a high and low, or loftier and lower in the godly soul?
The godly soul is interested in one thing and only thing, which is God. Because
so there's no needs that are higher or lower.
The godly soul doesn't really have it. The godly soul has one thing, which is that it is aware of God, and because it's aware of God, it needs God. But it works in that order.
That first it has to be aware of God.
That's right.
And we're still trying to work on that always?
Well, the author later on is going to speak in chapter 18 that there's a level of our godly soul which is always aware of God. But up till now, we've been speaking about a level of awareness that has to be developed. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
I obviously missed some classes before about this godly soul.
Right.
But so it's more practically speaking. But when you say that it needs God, that's really a matter of emunah, which is emotional. No.
No, emunah is not emotion. Emunah is something else. So emunah. So there's a tendency that people have, which is that when you we spoke last week about how you put things in context of other things. So if you value something as a culture, then things that are other than that then get grouped together as other than that. For instance, right? We all know that we have a subconscious, right? That's total nonsense. You don't have a subconscious.
You don't?
No, you don't. It's ridiculous.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking. You do not have a subconscious.
No.
Right? There are many parts of yourself which you are not consciously aware of, but you don't have this thing called a subconscious. Why do we group it as a subconscious? Because what do we value?
It's not conscious.
We value being consciously aware of ourselves, right? And so everything that we're not consciously aware of gets lumped together as if it's one thing, but it's not. Right? It's like if you're Ashkenazi, everybody else is Sephardim. It's like, no, it's not true. Not every non-Ashkenazi is Sephardim. It's just not the way it is, right?
I'll tell you.
What? I'll tell you, my sister-in-law is Yemenite. She's not Sephardi. She's not interested in, it's not, okay? If you live in a society which values reason and rationality, right? So anything that is not rational gets all lumped together. Notice how when we discussed emotion, I never mentioned the word rationality once. Emotion is how I feel towards something. That's it. Right? Now, right now, by the way, my emotions might be very rational. For instance, if I feel a great aversion to sticking my hand on a stove, right? I would say that's quite a rational emotion, right? But it's still, I feel that way. There's a woman whose name is not known because it would be dangerous if people knew her name, who does not feel fear.
Why is it dangerous to know anyway?
Because
She's a woman.
no, it just happens to be she's a woman. No, because it's easy to take advantage of her.
You know women would do that?
Who is she?
Nobody knows. I mean, she's known from medical literature because she just doesn't feel fear. She understands that things are dangerous. But think about it. If you,
Say her name dangerous.
because the people would know who she is and they could go and take advantage of her. Like you, if somebody comes and offers to.
Where did you hear this from?
I happen to know lots of interesting things. I read a lot, basically.
So
Is
is
it like
her name
no-
publicized?
No, in medical literature,
Is
it's
she
just
alive?
yes.
If you publicize it, people will take it.
People, someone would come knock on her door and say, would you like to? I have this really good offer, right? Right. All you need to do is sign your house away. Now, if you had to rationally think through, if you have to rationally think through whether that's a good idea or not, how long does that take you?
2 seconds.
It takes you not 2 seconds. If you have to rationally think it through, it would take you longer.
Your house?
A lot of our fear is based on intellect. So
That's
she's
right,
not
but at the end of the day, you have
so-
to feel. She doesn't feel the fear, which means
Okay, but like
She's rational.
she has to rationally think it through from the beginning.
So the doctors put this out as a thing?
That's an interesting study. They study her, yeah.
That's so cool.
Nobody, but so like walking down the street, crossing the street is very dangerous for her. Because she doesn't have this like at some point you feel the fear of crossing a busy street, right? What kids? At what point do kids understand that crossing a busy street is dangerous?
When they run in and...
They understand it 3, 4, 5. Doesn't take that long. At what point do they feel the fear not to run into the street? If they're men, not till 24. Something like that. Like it takes time so there's a difference between like feeling and understanding, right? Feelings that how you actually feel towards something, right? That's what allows us to have relationships with people. It also what motivates most of our behavior throughout the day. Some of our behavior is intellect governed, but most of it isn't. It's habit and emotion. If you don't feel fear, right, that all of those things that make you feel like maybe I shouldn't do this don't exist, and you have to actually stop and think. Life is very dangerous for such a person. Okay, getting back to what you said about emunah, or faith. So emunah, which is something Dr. addresses in chapter 18, which is much later, emunah is something else. Emunah is that the truth is revealed to me, but I don't know what the truth is. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Emunah is more like seichel. It's more like intellect, in the sense that it's really not about how I feel about something. It's about reality beyond myself. But it's not like intellect, because in intellect, I actually am changed by it. I learn, I grow, I develop. Whereas in emunah, the truth, it presents itself to me and maybe has an impact on me, but remain unchanged. So if you think about the example of that would be like a little child. If you tell a little child that something is dangerous, okay, it's dangerous, done. But you presented the truth and they received the truth. But nothing was really processed. They haven't, right? It takes time for the child to actually come to understand it. Oh, what does it mean that it's dangerous, right? Sticking your hand in the light socket is dangerous in a different way than like going into a stranger's car is dangerous, right? But a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old doesn't understand those things. It's just dangerous as a category. So, emunah is a totally different thing. There's the truth of Hashem. It's revealed. It affects us. But we don't necessarily we don't really know what that means, and we don't change, and so what can end up happening is the moon has a lot of contradictions, whereas intellect doesn't. So you're never going to have a situation where, setting your emotions aside, you're never going to have a situation where you're going to act in a way that doesn't really make sense to you.
But emunah is more closely related to a feeling, isn't it?
It's not. It's actually you don't feel at all. Now, what most people will call emunah means it's actually something else. It's actually something else. It's love. It's I love something. I desire it to be true. Like, for instance, you find out a relative committed a crime, right? I don't believe it. What do you mean you don't believe it? Right? What you mean is that I love this person, I don't want to think ill of them, so I want to reject that, right? So when we feel the strong desire that reality be a certain way because we love it or we hate it, people often call that, but that's actually, emunah is something else. Emunah, in a sense, is more like when you're tutoring a child, you're absolutely sure that if they put in the work and you work with them, they'll succeed. But you haven't seen their success. You've seen no evidence of their success. But something tells you that that's the way the world is. And by the way, you don't necessarily have to like what you have emunah. So the emunah it's a totally different thing. So often if you look at something for what it is, rather than defining it as irrational or just putting it in a lumping category, right? Intellect works a certain way. There are things that are not intellect. They're not emotion. Emunah is one of them. Other things are one thing. Pleasure is not that. Pain isn't that. Physical health is. There's a bunch of things which are not intellect or emotion, right? Just like some things you're consciously aware of and some things you're not. But to take all the things you're not consciously aware of and say they're the same, it's not true. Some of the things you're not consciously aware of, you can be consciously aware of if you pay attention to them. Some of them you can't. So it's better to have not to use things like words like irrational as a fundamental description. It's like physically saying that the whole world is divided into potatoes and not potatoes, which is technically true but not very useful, unless you're making mashed potatoes, in which case what you care about is potatoes. So emunah is there's something true, and I can sense that it's true. I might not even like that I sense that it's true. Like a classic example of this is people that are angry with God. They hate God. They wish God would not exist. But for some reason they can't seem to just let him go. So what's that? It seems, on some level seems true to them God is real. And they really wish it wasn't the case, right? So you have emunah. But that's not emotion-based. That's something different. That's more like emunah. A lot of times, it's like an expression of, wishful thinking. That's a different thing. Okay, tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to go more into detail and describe the different emotions and intellect of the animal soul and what they're actually like in detail. Not all of them, but some of them.